Welcome. You're listening to the Malcontent News Russia-Ukraine War podcast, the show that cuts through the fog of war and updates you about the ongoing conflict in Ukraine. Don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, and Google Podcasts.
Hello, I'm Marina Yevshan, your host of the Russia-Ukraine War Report podcast, and today is June the 4th, 2024. It has been 3,781 days since Russia started covert military operations in Crimea, 10 years and 105 days since the start of the Russia-Ukraine war, and 2 years and 102 days since Russia expanded its war of aggression. Today's podcast looks at events that happened on Monday and Tuesday morning. During the podcast, you will find the Russia-Ukraine war map helpful to visualize the areas discussed. A link is in the podcast description. There are only minor map updates today. The Russia-Ukraine war report is compiled by our team from around the world. Today's report includes information from our direct contacts and journalists in Ukraine, the Russian Ministry of Defense, the General Staff of the Armed Forces of Ukraine morning reports, operational commands north, south and east of Ukraine, open source intelligence, our in-house team of analysts and geospatial experts, and pro-Ukrainian and pro-Russian mail bloggers and social media channels with a track record of trying to be accurate. We have one mission, the truth, because the truth matters. Here is my daily assessment. There are only small changes from yesterday, so if you want to skip ahead, it won't hurt my feelings. I won't even know. 1. We maintain Russia's ongoing spring-summer offensive failed to achieve any of its operational goals after 44 days. 2. The sharp increase in aggressive acts by the Russian Federation directed at the NATO alliance and its member nations is a direct result of the failed policy of de-escalation and excessive fear of Moscow's tactical nuclear threats. We maintain the world is caught in the mutually assured destruction and stability paradox. 3. We maintain that autocrat Vladimir Putin's offer to negotiate a ceasefire based on the current line of conflict is not an overture made in good faith. It is meant to derail the upcoming June the 15th, the 16th Peace Conference in Switzerland, which more than 100 nations will attend, and to amplify the false narrative that Ukraine is the aggressor. 4. Russia's sustained attacks on Ukraine's energy infrastructure, which has destroyed 95% of its thermal power plant capacity, are a continuation of Russian crimes against humanity that started in October 2022, as outlined in 2 arrest warrants issued by the International Criminal Court on March the 5th. 5. Ukrainian personnel shortages are extending deployment times, limiting troop rotations, and forcing combatant effective units to maintain defensive positions, which is contributing to Russia's ability to make small tactical advances in some areas of operation. 6. Russian forces continue to exploit the delays in significant military aid from the US, the Czech Republic-led Ammunition Initiative, and the European Union, carrying out at least 124 attacks on Monday and 78 on Sunday. 7. We maintain that the quantity of artillery ammunition available to Ukrainian forces is increasing, but has not reached a level that will enable the stabilization of their defensive lines across the entire line of conflict. 8. Russia's trampling of international humanitarian law has been accelerating since March the 22nd. We maintain that the willful ignoring of blatant Russian war crimes by international watchdogs will continue to encourage escalation. 9. Autocrat Putin has started the largest purge of the Russian Ministry of Defense, led by the FSB, since Joseph Stalin's 1936 to 1938 purge. 10. We maintain the possibility of a large-scale Russian attack into the Sumy Oblast from Russia or the Kyiv Oblast from Belarus is extremely low. 11. The attacks on Ukraine's energy infrastructure have incrementally increased the chance of an intentional nuclear accident at multiple nuclear facilities in Ukraine. There were fewer Russian attacks on civilians and civilian infrastructure on Monday. Over the last 24 hours, Russia launched 2 Iskander-K cruise missiles, which were intercepted. The missiles were shot down over the city of Dnipro, and falling debris struck a residential area. 7 people were wounded, including a 1-month-old infant and a 17-year-old boy. Most of the June 3rd Russian attacks targeting civilians were carried out in the Kharkiv Oblast. In the village of Dachne, 5 Russian S-300 anti-aircraft missiles used for a ground attack struck a summer recreation area that was being used as housing for displaced civilians. 1 man from the Donetsk Oblast was killed and 2 more were wounded. The VKS, that's the Russian Aerospace Forces, bombed the village of Borivska-Andreevka with UMPK glide bombs, destroying a house and wounding 2 people. 2 more civilians were wounded in Stary Saltiv by Russian shelling. In the Donetsk Oblast, the VKS bombed the settlement of Mikhailivka twice, killing 2, including a 12-year-old boy. In the Kherson Oblast, Russian forces targeted 14 villages and settlements and the cities of Bereslav and Kherson. 4 civilians were wounded. Alexander Kharchenko, the director of the Energy Industry Research Center, warned that Ukrainians should be prepared to experience power outages for, quote, several years. He said the situation is not critical and is manageable, but it will take years to restore Ukraine's energy infrastructure. And, by the way, I'm telling you this sitting in a dark room, and I'm not producing photos. Here is today's action report. Russia's spring-summer offensive is in its 45th day, with at least 124 discrete assaults carried out by Russian forces on Monday. Despite the number of attacks, there was only a small Russian advance recorded west of Avdiivka. There have been several reports in the media about newly trained Ukrainian troops being sent to frontline units with inadequate training and instead receiving training at the front. All of the reports have centered around an officer in the Ukrainian 93rd Mechanized Brigade with the call sign of Schmidt. The officer claimed that some fresh troops couldn't even disassemble, clean and reassemble their service weapons and never threw grenades or fired a weapon as part of their training. Of a group of 100 soldiers, only 3 were ready to advance to the forwardmost line of friendly troops. Part of the Ukrainian mobilization law passed in April calls for the rotation of some troops who have been on the front lines for more than a year. The issue is some of the troops are arriving unprepared for combat, and this is a systemic problem that the Ministry of Defense urgently needs to address. Ukraine still does not have a NATO-style military training program implemented in all training centers, and as part of its long-term goal to join the alliance, has laid out a roadmap to meet NATO standards by 2026. We believe that any Ukrainian soldier being deployed into a combat unit must have at least 8 weeks of thorough training to improve their combat potential and survivability at the front. They are the most precious resource the military has. Grunts with guns take territory, grunts with guns hold territory. Ukraine has a duty to train its ground troops to the highest possible standard before deployment. In our assessment, that commitment should be upheld even if it means continuing to trade territory for time. Now, let's talk about what happened on the battlefield. There have only been small changes since the last podcast. Ready? Here we go. Starting in the Kharkiv Oblast, we begin in the Liptsev-Ovchansk area of operation, or AO. Ukrainian forces continue to push Russian troops back in Vovchansk, advancing 600 meters in the northeastern part of the settlement. Heavy fighting continued, and Ukrainian forces started to push into the central area west of the city park. Operational Command East reported that Ukrainian forces captured almost 60 Russian soldiers in the northeast corner of Vovchansk. Russian forces continued their attempts to advance in the direction of Liptsi without success. Ukrainian commanders reported that defensive lines had been stabilized. Ukrainian forces struck numerous targets in the Belgorod region along the Kharkiv border, including 2 S-300 anti-aircraft batteries, engineering equipment attempting to build defensive structures, 2 A-65 Msta-B 152mm self-propelled howitzers, and a Tornado-U multiple-launch rocket system. One of the S-300 batteries was located in the village of Kiselyova and has been used to fire missiles at the city of Kharkiv. Russian sources claimed that Ukraine was targeting S-300 missile sites in the Belgorod settlements of Gostishevo and Stroitel. We link to the pictures and videos of all of the destroyed equipment and the geolocation information in our sitrep. There is more information in the podcast description on how to become a subscriber. In the Svatove AO of Kharkiv and Luhansk oblasts, fighting has continued in Berestove, where Russian forces remain unable to capture the western part of the village. Further south, Russian sabotage and reconnaissance units, also known as DRG, engaged in positional fighting near Stelmachivka. In the Kremenna AO, Russian DRG units tried to advance in the direction of Nevske. A Russian attack in the direction of Terny was also unsuccessful. Southeast of Kremenna, in the Siversk AO of the Luhansk Oblast, Russian forces continued their significant attacks northeast, east and southeast of Belogorivka, and continued to suffer heavy losses. Russian troops also launched a significant attack from Zolotarivka in the direction of Verkhnyokamyansk. Let's talk about the Donbass and the northeastern part of the Donetsk Oblast. In the Siversk and Soledar AOs, Russian forces launched 24 attacks towards Siversk. Heavy fighting was reported in the direction of Ivanodarivka, Spirne, Vyimka and Rozdolivka. Fighting was ongoing and the situation was described as difficult along the entire line of conflict. On June 1st, the former Knauf sheetrock and building material factory in occupied Soledar and Bakhmutske was hit by rockets fired by HIMARS. A Russian video showed that several pieces of equipment were destroyed. In the Kostantinivka AO, Russian forces continued their attacks on the edge of Chasiv Yar. Attempts to advance into Kalinivka, the canal district of Chasiv Yar, and deeper into Ivanivske were repulsed. Further south, fighting continued within the no man's land of Klishivka and southeast of Andreevka. In the southwestern part of the Donetsk Oblast, the heaviest fighting was in the Avdiivka AO, with Russian forces carrying out 35 attacks. Russian troops are conducting intense attacks on the eastern edges of Novoalexandrivka and Novopokrovske and southeast of Novoselivka Persha. During today's attack, Russia used turtle tanks, which were destroyed by artillery and drone strikes. Elements of the Russian 433rd Regiment in Ocheretine reported that out of a company of 88, only 16 remain. In a video, a Russian soldier with the 433rd said, quote, "To be honest, you don't know what the fuck is going on. Yeah, we're not fucking flying. Quick sidebar, he means they aren't on the attack. We are sitting in the defense." Unquote. Russian forces were able to advance from Netailove to the Karlovska Reservoir and Vovcha River in the direction of Karlivka. Claims by Russian sources that Russian forces made a successful wet crossing into the village are false. The reservoir and river are critical natural defensive points, and we had assessed in March that Ukrainian troops would eventually withdraw to Karlivka. There continues to be significant fog of war in the Vuhledar AO. Fighting continued in Krasnogorivka. The situation within the settlement appears to be better than reported, with the White Angels releasing a video showing ongoing civilian evacuations. The efforts were not rushed and there were no signs of ongoing heavy attacks. Russian attempts to advance into Georgievka and deeper into Paraskoviivka were unsuccessful. Further south, Russian attempts to advance in the direction of Vodyane from Solodke were also repulsed. In the Orikhiv AO of the Zaporizhzhia Oblast, Russian forces only engaged in positional fighting in the remains of Robotine and made another attempt to advance in the direction of Malatokmachka without success. the Director General of the International Atomic Energy Agency, Rafael Grossi, addressed the Board of Governors about the situation at the Zaporizhzhia nuclear power plant. Grossi described the situation as, quote, precarious, and told the board that all 7 pillars of nuclear security and safety have been, quote, fully or partially compromised. Grossi added, quote, issues related to staffing, routine inspection and maintenance of the safety structures, systems and components, reliability of supply chains as well as on-site emergency arrangements continue to be challenging and to present risks to the nuclear safety and security of the plant. He told the board that the IAEA inspectors do not have access to some areas of, quote, significance to nuclear safety and security, and are not permitted to have, quote, open discussion with all relevant staff. In the Kherson EO, Russian forces launched 3 attacks on Ukrainian positions in the Krinky area and the eastern part of Kozachye Lageri without success. Shortly after I recorded yesterday's podcast, a video showed a Russian supply convoy of 15 vehicles under attack just east of Sverdlikova, southwest of the city of Kursk. The strike was further west than initial Russian reports, but otherwise accurate. The convoy was not properly spaced, and the lead 2 vehicles were destroyed, followed by the rear vehicle. The remaining units then attempted to cross overland and were destroyed by artillery and drone strikes. Here is my Theaterwide update. The United States announced that Vice President Kamala Harris and National Security Advisor Jake Sullivan will attend the Swiss Peace Conference on June the 15th. President of Ukraine Volodymyr Zelensky accused China of working with Russia to disrupt the upcoming peace conference. Zelensky said that Beijing was using its influence on the global south to discourage participation. Chinese Foreign Ministry spokesman Mao Ning dismissed the claim. Western leaders have accused Russia of threatening nations with embargoes, higher trade prices, and other sanctions if they participate in the conference. At least one country, Saudi Arabia, has backed out. Russian state media reported that propagandist, disgraced former US military officer and convicted pedophile Scott Ritter was removed from a flight in New York City by Customs and Border Patrol agents and had his passport confiscated under orders of the US State Department. Ritter was on the first leg of a trip to Moscow when he was allegedly removed from the plane. Also removed was former judge and Russian propagandist Andrew Napolitano. Both were supposed to speak at the annual St. Petersburg International Economic Forum with US propagandists Jackson Hinkle and Larry Johnson. Hinkle and Johnson departed on an earlier flight. The Russian commander who recorded the abuse of Ukrainian POWs in northern Kharkiv has been identified as Junior Lieutenant Alexei Kirpin of Krasное Selo, Leningrad Oblast, Russia. Kirpin was trained in occupied Donetsk by the Russian neo-Nazi Rusich group and is an associate of Alexei Milchakov. Italy announced it would provide Ukraine with another SAMP-T medium-range air defense system. The system is currently deployed in Kuwait, and no timetable was given on when it would arrive in Ukraine. SAMP-T was developed in Europe and has similar capabilities to Patriot, with a significantly shorter range. And that's what we know. Your support of my home, Ukraine, helps us make history and protect the future for all.
You've been listening to the Malcontent News Russia-Ukraine War podcast. To help keep us independent, please consider providing financial support by becoming a patron. Want on-demand news in your hand? Download the Google News app and make Malcontent News one of your favorites to receive breaking news updates. Thank you for listening.